What companies deserve your hard-earned dollar? Which would you want to work for? How can you know if they share your values? Just ask us. Just Capital is a nonprofit that tracks who really means business in supporting workers, customers, communities, the environment, and shareholders. We measure progress, track success, and help them be better. When you see the Just Capital seal, you know what's real, because just business is better business. Visit justcapital.com to learn who makes your dollar count.
Good afternoon. We are doing it live right here. Mottek On Money, 790 KBC. Afternoons at 4 o'clock, live on the air. Streaming live, too, on 790 KBC. Online at kbc.com and the on-demand podcast at kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Don't forget the KBC app as well. Well, stocks did close higher today, off the best levels of the day. Today, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell was back in the spotlight. Says he wants more evidence that inflation is easing before the Fed starts to cut rates. In the meantime, rates are stubbornly high, impacting the economy and consumers. The Dow did come in for a closing gain of 76 points, the S&P 500 of 26, and the NASDAQ gained 92. All of the major averages still hovering near the record highs we hit last week. The yield on the 10-year note now at 4.11%. Looks like the price of gold kissed another record high today. Cryptos have cooled off a bit after an epic run-up recently. We're watching the Magnificent Seven stocks, which have not been so magnificent lately. As a matter of fact, Tesla ended down nearly 29% on the year as of today, while NVIDIA has gained more than 78% since the start of the year. Taking a look at what else we're watching here today, the Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari, a former California guy. In fact, he ran for California governor some years ago. He said that he has penciled in 2 interest rate cuts this year during the Fed's last forecasting round in December, but added he might reduce the number of cuts he expects at the Fed's next meeting in just a couple of weeks. The Fed's Beige Book report, that's the survey of economic conditions around the country, came out today as well, and it looks like 8 of the Fed's 12 regional banks, ranging from Boston to San Francisco, reported a pickup in growth. One district found a slight softening in economic activity. The earnings news also in the spotlight. Shares of LA-based Honest moving up 5% in after-hours trading, following the release of the company's fourth quarter financial result that showed revenue increasing and the company swinging to a gain. That's the company co-founded by Jessica Alba. Taking a look at Bitcoin right now, it's down about 1,000 to 66,175. Ethereum down $25 at 38.26, and Doge at 16 cents. As you heard at the top of the hour, nervous time again in the Middle East and Red Sea. We have seen oil move higher, up nearly $1 today to $79.13 a barrel. Brent crude in London, the global benchmark, also up nearly $1 to just shy of $83 a barrel. It's the day after the California primary election. Did Prop 1 pass or not here in California? We're watching the latest numbers and what it means to taxpayers if it does pass. Taxpayer watchdog Susan Shelley will be joining me live later this hour on that and more on the big election day. And the incumbent district attorney here in Los Angeles will be facing a veteran prosecutor in the November runoff election for L.A. County DA. I'll talk about that with the Honorable Dennis Zine, former L.A. City Council member and longtime LAPD sergeant, now still reserve officer with about 56 years of service to the City of Angels. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, and the whole works this afternoon. Joining us live now is Paul Dietrich, B. Riley's Wealth Chief Investment Strategist. Paul, thank you very much for taking the call here. It's been a while since we chatted behind live microphones. Record highs for the market last week, a bit of a breather this week. Crypto's also rallying. The Fed chairman in the spotlight this week on Capitol Hill. Give us your view of things here at the moment.
Well, you know, if you want to start off with the stock market first, we have not seen such an egregious valuation disconnect between fair market value and the stock market since literally right before the dot-com boom collapsed in 2001. And I've asked the question several times, can stocks continue to go up to heaven and never go down? And we all know the answer, that it's going to go down at some point. And it's probably sooner rather than later, and we're going to see a significant drop. I mean, if you just go back to its 200-day moving average, which is the long-term trend of the market, you've got a significant drop coming, and that's without a recession, without anything, we're going to see a significant drop. And the fundamentals, it's all momentum driven. There are no fundamentals. No one's looking at it. And then you really look at the smart money. You look at Jeff Bezos. He just sold for the first time ever $8 billion of Amazon stock. Zuckerberg at Facebook, Meta, just sold $1 billion or so. You're seeing Warren Buffett with record amounts of cash ready to swoop in once the market goes down. And, what do they know that we don't know? And so that's kind of where we are with the stock market. If you look at all the economic, if you really delve into the Beige Book today and the other economic reports, you're seeing a real softening in consumer spending. Consumer durables were down 6% in last month. You're seeing manufacturing is still not out of recession territory. All of these things, you're just seeing a slow weakening in purchases, both big and small, and you're seeing more and more credit card defaults and people coming up against their credit limits. And we've seen that before. We saw it in 2008 and we saw it in 2001, right before the recession. Once you start hitting up at your credit card limits, you know what they do. They just won't let you spend anymore on your credit cards. And so people have a choice between essentials and then all the stuff they've been buying previously. That's going to slow the economy. And then you look at the jobs numbers and, unemployment, the employment numbers are still very, very strong, but we've seen about 6 months now of a slowing of job growth, and we're seeing new jobs kind of they're just going down. And so this is all of this combined. You see you can see the economy starting to slow, and we just saw this week a big revision in GDP last quarter of going down, and GDP revisions going on now. It wouldn't surprise me if we see either, flat to negative GDP for a couple of quarters this year. And so that's kind of where we are. And then inflation. The last mile of inflation is going to be so hard, and that's what every member of the Fed is talking about every day. And, you were talking about Neil Kashkari talking about two. Still, the consensus on Wall Street is there's going to be 4 or more rate cuts, but the Fed is telling us that it's only going to be 3. That's what Jerome Powell is saying, and a number of others are saying 2. And what they're seeing in their numbers is that, inflation's been going up the last few months. If we see oil prices and oil problems because of the Middle East going up, that's not going to help inflation. And I just keep seeing it's not like anyone's lowering prices if you've gone to the grocery store lately. They're keeping them steady. I just don't see what things are the drivers to bring inflation down. Now, I don't necessarily think it's going to go up much, and it might go sideways. But it's certainly not going to go down to their 2% targets. And that means that they are not going to lower interest rates. And I believe Kashkari is the one who's most right. I believe at most we'll see 2, and it will be right at the end of the year. And everyone else, who's dreaming of lower rates, it's going to be they're just delusional, especially when you look at the regional bank situation. We saw one big bank that was saved today, one regional bank, but you can't save all of them, and they're all in exactly the same position as New York Community Bank, which was down 40%, I think, earlier on today. And it's going to happen as these office buildings keep coming up for refinancing, and they're 40% empty. They're paying higher rates to refinance, and the business plan for most developers is they just can't make it work. So there's going to be some big defaults, and when that happens, the regional banks, which if you look at the ETFs and the publicly traded ones that have already, they're down 60, 70%, this may be the Lehman Brothers moment sometime this year that really tanks the economy.
Thank you for that comprehensive analysis and assessment of things here. We're on the air live with Paul Dietrich, B. Riley Wealth's Chief Investment Strategist. B. Riley is based here in Los Angeles. Curiously, we've seen the price of gold hit record highs, right now hovering at $2,156 an ounce, just at a time when we're told inflation is supposedly easing. Similar situation happened, as you probably recall, during the financial crisis. Inflation was relatively low back in those days when we saw gold, I believe, pop to $1,000, which was big news back then. Now it's at record highs here above 2,100, approaching 2,160. And other commodities have rallied as well. What is that telling us about where things are going?
Well, I ran a gold mutual fund for 10 years, and so I'm very familiar with gold. And quite frankly, I believe that gold is generally not a great investment if you're just looking to invest. But I hold now gold in all of my portfolios, and the reason is I hold it as an insurance policy. And when everything is tanking in the market, gold does its job and it goes up exponentially, and it can save your portfolio by having some percentage in gold. I think that I've looked at gold for 100 years, the price of gold, and every time that it reaches record highs like it's doing now, it's a reflection of what people think are the risks in the market. And, the risks are very, very high. And again, having a little of it in your portfolio is a way to hedge against geopolitical risks, election risks, and risks of regional banks cratering, all the risks that we see in the market. Gold is one answer.
On the air live with Paul Dietrich at B. Riley. He's the Chief Investment Strategist at B. Riley Wealth. I know from previous conversations you're not a crypto fan. On this program, we speak to the biggest fans as well as the harshest critics. It's hard to ignore certainly the run-up we've seen in Bitcoin recently, and of course those Bitcoin exchange-traded funds, those ETFs that got approved just recently that seem to have helped propel Bitcoin higher, among other things. What are your thoughts about what's happening in the crypto world at the moment?
Well, the reason that Bitcoin has gone up is not because anything has fundamentally changed in Bitcoin. It still has. There's no there. There's no underlying value. It's not really a currency, but it was terribly difficult to buy Bitcoin, hold it in these exchanges, and when you decided to sell it, it took longer than certainly trading a stock. And so it was a cumbersome process, and these ETFs have certainly made it a lot easier to get in and out of Bitcoin. And I think that has been the main driver of Bitcoin going up. I think now we've seen that movement, and now people are going to focus on, what is the underlying value of Bitcoin. Now, we know what it is to drug dealers and arms dealers and people who do things illegally. But in terms of a store of value, like a stock is, or a bond is, or cash is, Nobody can answer that question. There is no store of value. It's just an algorithm. It's a bunch of zeros and ones. And I see it as a bubble. You know, we saw the dot-com bubble right before the recession in 2001. Remember how everyone was just completely enamored by a new security that had come out called mortgage-backed securities in 2008. Nobody ever hears about those anymore. They all crashed. And the same thing is going to happen. It's one of the reasons why we actually need a recession. A recession historically cleans out all the excesses and the bubbles in the market, and certainly crypto is one of them.
Very interesting, and thank you for explaining that and giving us your view of that. And let me ask you, going back to what you said, possible Lehman moment on the horizon, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell did talk about commercial real estate during his testimony today, saying the office market's carnage was a shock to the system that could take a period of years to work through. So what is happening with this? You mentioned it briefly, and certainly with this kind of a storm cloud on the horizon, potentially impacting regional banks, you mentioned. And what do you think will happen if things do go cattywampus even more in commercial real estate?
Well, you know, it's interesting. He, I think, gave an accurate representation of how this is going to really harm the markets and the economy. And he did say that the big banks, and I agree with him, you know, the 7-9 biggest banks, they're probably okay in terms of capitalization, and they have written down their loans on these things. So they're probably safe. But 75% of all commercial real estate and all office real estate in the United States is financed by regional banks. And they have a completely different regulatory scheme than the too big to fail big banks do. They don't have to write down, you know, the value of they just keep it on the books for what it was the last time they refinanced. And we all know from looking at, you know, office real estate ETFs that are down 60-70%. That these banks should be writing down. And the problem is that if you're in Omaha, Nebraska, or, you know, Oklahoma, and you have a big, shiny building that's the primary building in your landscape, and all of a sudden we all know it's 40% empty, and it comes up for refinancing, and about $2.5 trillion is coming up in the next 18 months, of refinancing, and there's just no way that the developers and owners can make any money with interest rates the way they are and 40% occupancy or no occupancy. And so what's happening is that they're turning in their keys to the banks. The banks have not written down their loans, so they don't have enough capital in most cases to cover you know, if there's a run on the bank, and we saw this with Silicon Valley Bank, and basically the federal government ran out of all their FDIC money. Now, I have no doubt that over the weekend, whenever this happens, that they'll go and print another, you know, $500 billion of money to refinance FDIC to keep, because we don't want a bank run in the United States, but it's going to cause havoc with regional banks because they're just not honestly reporting, you know, the values of their loans and their real capital, access to capital in order to cover, you know, depositors. And so it's not. Nobody should be surprised. It's going to be the U.S. government that bails them out. But this is the sort of thing that could really be a Lehman Brothers moment that could really tank the economy.
Very interesting, and maybe we'll have another working weekend for the Fed this weekend. We'll follow what's happening back east with that bank very, very closely. And before I let you off the hook here, we've covered a lot of ground here, but want to ask you the big question here. Any specific places where you are putting money now and or taking it off the table?
I think, short-term Treasury bonds at the moment are safe. I think that gold when you're going into a contracting economy, there's 411 years of business cycle data going back to the British and Dutch stock exchanges, and we have these cycles. We have an expansionary cycle, and that's called a bull market, and then we have a contracting cycle, which is generally considered a bear market. The good news is that the bull markets are always much, much longer, usually 6 to 10 years, compared to an 18-month contracting cycle. But it's been we had a 17-year bull market after 2009, the longest bull market in U.S. and I suspect world history. And unless you believe that the business cycle has been miraculously repealed, we are going to have a contracting cycle to get rid of all the excesses. And God knows we have lots of excesses and bubbles in the economy. You can see it with meme stocks, with cryptocurrencies, and just with, in general, having had years of 0% interest rates. It's had an effect on the economy, and we've got to kind of blow it out and clean it out. And I think it'll be good for the economy to go through a contracting period. But as an investor, what you have to realize is that everything's going down, and that historically, in contracting periods of time, the stock market goes down 36% on average in the last 100 years or so. And so what you want to do as an investor is that you want to protect your capital, you want to protect your retirement savings, and you want to ball yourself up into a fetal position and just wait it out.
Paul, thank you very much. Always greatly appreciate these conversations and your thoughtful analysis, and we'll looking for you on the major networks and hopefully connect with you again very soon. And I certainly understand why you're in such demand at business conferences, and hopefully see you out here in Los Angeles once again. That is Paul Dietrich, the Chief Investment Strategist at B. Riley, which is based here in Los Angeles. Paul, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank.
Right out to the freeways now, 790 KBC. You need an experienced advocate, and Clark Fielding and his team of sharks at Fielding Law are on standby, ready to dive into your case. My friend Clark the Shark is fearless for justice and your go-to attorney when injured in an accident that wasn't your fault. Whether it's a car accident, slip, trip, fall, or any kind of personal injury, Fielding Law is here to make sure you get the care, attention, and compensation you deserve. Fielding Law can assess the circumstances of the case, negotiate tenaciously with insurance companies, and if necessary, file a lawsuit and litigate to seek fair compensation on behalf of you, the injured party. An injury is a major disruption in your life. Medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, property damage, and other losses incurred as a result of the injury are all part of the damages. Don't try and handle the process alone. You need an expert in the process, and the team at Fielding Law are the ones to trust. Put Clark Fielding's number in your phone under the word accident. That number is 833-88-SHARK, 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. 790 KBC welcomes Herman's Hermits coming to the Canyon in Montclair March 30th. Tickets are on sale now at AXS.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Tickets furnished by the Canyon, where music meets the soul. Call now. Caller 9 wins 1-888-795-2222. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. The Dow coming in for a closing gain of 76 points at 38,661. The S&P 500 of 26 at 5105. And the NASDAQ gained 92 at 16,031. All the major averages still hovering near the record highs we hit last week. The yield in the 10-year note at 4.11%. Bitcoin down about 1,000 now at 66,175. Ethereum down about 20 at 3,826. And Doge at 16 cents. Seeing the price of oil spike on the latest news out of the Middle East. Oil up nearly $1 today at $79.13 a barrel. Watching what's happening with New York Community Bank, agreed to deal with several investment firms, including one that has Stephen Mnuchin's Liberty Strategic Capital involved Hudson Bay Capital and Reverence Capital Partners for more than $1 billion in exchange for equity. And we're watching New York Community Bank shares rebound after that troubled regional bank announced a $1 billion capital raise. That's the one that we were just talking about with Paul Dietrich, which is in the spotlight in the context of what's going on in commercial real estate. Now the latest news here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. The political dust still settling following the California primary election. One of the contests getting the most attention is the race for Los Angeles County District Attorney. The final votes are still not yet in, but it appears the incumbent DA will be facing a veteran prosecutor in the November runoff election for LA County District Attorney. Soft on crime DA George Gascon will likely be facing prosecutor Nathan Hochman in November. Joining us live now is the Honorable Dennis Zine, former LA City Council member, longtime LAPD sergeant, current LAPD Reserve officer, and I'm delighted to say Dennis Zine is on the line. Dennis Zine, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Frank. Thank you, and a pleasure to be with you and the KABC radio audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis Zine. Give us your reaction to the election there as it relates to the DA.
Well, I am surprised that DA Gascon succeeded in getting to a runoff. I hope that there was enough controversy, enough crime victims, enough problems in the county of Los Angeles that he'd be removed at the primary election. Unfortunately, that did not happen. I met with all of the candidates, and as you have during the debate, which you emceed, and I think we have a great candidate going against Gascon. And I'm telling people, if Gascon wins in this runoff, it's time to decide to move out of Los Angeles County, because with a shrinking Los Angeles Police Department, a shrinking LA County Sheriff's Department, and a district attorney that doesn't prosecute vicious criminals, there's not much hope for the people in this region. And it's interesting to note that of the latest crime trend, we know about catalytic converters, the suspects are now not only stealing Camaros at an increased rate, but what they are now doing is stealing the wheels and the tires. They're jacking up cars and stealing the wheels and tires. I mean, it's gotten to the point, like San Francisco and Oakland, they become crime-ridden environments. That's what's going to happen in Los Angeles if we can't get a district attorney to prosecute those that commit these serious crimes and make our community, our county, unsafe. So I look at it as an opportunity for the people, the voters, the victims, the potential victims, to step forward and say, we're tired of this situation where the criminals run free and we have to hide, from smash and grabs to the latest, stealing not just one, but 4 tires and wheels from parked cars. This is how serious it's gotten. And again, I don't understand how Gascon made it to this point. He didn't get a significant number, but he got enough to get into a runoff. So hopefully the voters will come around and say it's time to make this change. And I'm sure he'll dig in and he'll get money from people who believe that he's a good candidate, and he's a terrible candidate, and it's done terrible for the crime environment in Los Angeles County.
And at that debate you referenced, Nathan Hochman, who's now, it appears, going to be facing Gascon in that runoff in November, is certainly a veteran prosecutor. It noted that Gascon has never prosecuted a single case, right?
Exactly. And I met with Nathan. Again, I've met with the other candidates, and I think he's got experience. He's got knowledge. Some people criticize the fact that at one time he was a registered Republican. And let me tell you, folks, it's not about Republican or Democrat. When a suspect comes with a gun, he doesn't ask you what your political affiliation is or what your religion is. You've got property, and the suspect wants to take it. So people need to get away from a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. It's about crime. It's about you being safe and your family being safe. Forget about the politics. Just think about safety, and law enforcement is there to protect you. And if they make an arrest and there's no prosecution, I guarantee that suspect's going to go commit more crimes, and you're going to be the potential victim. So people need to really wake up to reality. But I think Nathan's going to be an outstanding prosecutor, and I think you're going to find these other people that were in the race will be supporting him in this endeavor to remove Gascon from political office.
On the line with Dennis Zine, and it must be heartbreaking for you, Dennis Zine. You've dedicated your entire life to the City of Angels as a police officer on the streets and as a city council member, and for you to say that the way things are going if the DA is reelected, that it's time to move out of the city. It must be absolutely heartbreaking for you and others, of course.
It is, and I'm a native Angelino. I have a son who's a captain with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I don't want to see him have to say, well, we have to go to another place, because you can go anywhere in this country if you've got some experience in law enforcement, because there's a desperate need throughout this country. Not that they have the crime trends that we have in Los Angeles County, but the fact of the matter is we've got great climate most of the time. We have some inclement weather once in a while, but the rest of the time it's a great place. But the Chief Moore, who retired from Los Angeles Police Department, where's he moving? He's moving to Tennessee. And people who retire, they get out of Los Angeles. It's not because we got a terrible environment. We got great weather. But it's the problems with the crime trends that keep getting worse, and more victims and more victims. So if you got a Camaro, they're going to steal your car. If you got a car parked in the street, they're going to steal your tires, they'll steal your catalytic converter. And just talk to people up in Northern California, San Francisco, and Oakland. It's out of control. And now they're talking about changing some of the laws that they have, where they've loosened the laws. Now they're talking about tightening them up again. We shouldn't have to do that. But we should have a prosecutor that prosecutes those who commit crime. And if it can be proven they're guilty, then subsequent incarceration. And if they're innocent, then let them go. But we know from the number of victims, it's out of control. And I do have the latest number from the LAPD, number of police officers that they have with the Los Angeles Police Department as of February 10th. They're at 8,915 for the city of Los Angeles. Not enough to provide protection for the people of this region.
Dennis Zine, thank you very much for coming to the line. And it is to be noted, I was just in a store today. They're locking up more merchandise in stores, drugstores, and so forth. Locking up the merchandise instead of locking up the criminals stealing the merchandise. So that is to be noted. Dennis Zine, thank you very much for the call this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank.
That is the Honorable Dennis Zine, former Los Angeles City Council member, longtime LAPD sergeant, current reserve officer for the LAPD. About 56 years of service to the City of Angels. And now out to the freeways on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KBC. Thank you for listening. We are doing it live right here, weekday afternoons at 4 o'clock on the air live, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. And yes, the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Well, it's the day after the California primary election. Did Prop 1 pass or not? We're watching the latest numbers and what it means to you, the taxpayer. Looks like HLA did pass in Los Angeles. Let's bring in taxpayer watchdog extraordinaire Susan Shelley, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard now on Friday nights right here at 6 p.m. on 790 KBC. Susan, thanks for taking the call, and thanks for being part of our election coverage last night. Give us the very latest here on Prop 1, first of all.
Well, Prop 1 started out about 53% yes at the start of the count. When there was about 31% of the vote counted so far, it was at 53%, and then it was eroding all night with every update of the count, and it finished in the middle of the night at 50.2. So there is only a 14,000 vote margin statewide and still half the ballots left to count. So it's very close, too close to call. And the trend line would suggest that it's not going to pass because it was falling in the polls throughout the month of voting. And so the late ballots probably are more no than yes based on what we saw in the polls.
And this is the so-called mental health bond, which would also impact the homeless situation as well. At least that's the goal of this, right? But what would it mean to the taxpayer if this does pass? And I know you had spoken out against this, and give us an update here on what you see happening if this goes through.
Well, what it does, it's a $6.38 billion bond, which would cost taxpayers about $12 billion by the time it was all paid back with interest. And it only buys 11,000 beds. So that's a tremendous amount of money for not much benefit, typical government project. And typically what you want to see with bonds, when you borrow money for 30 years, you want to see something concrete that's being built, no pun intended. You want to see something that will be there for a while. But this is actually just funding grants to go build treatment plans and treatment centers which are not specified. It'll all be decided later. You never use bond money and commit the taxpayers to that debt for something that's completely unspecified. And then an additional $2 billion inside the bond was for more of the Project Home Key housing. They've already put more than $700 million into that project, And what they're doing is buying old hotels and renovating them at very high cost. And then someone has to pay for the services that are associated with that, so that falls to the counties. Which brings you to the other part of Prop 1 that's so devastating. It takes money away from the counties for providing mental health services and puts that money either into the state or into more of a Project Home Key housing projects. So they lose money for services. It's being sold to people as helping mental health services. It is actually robbing funding from mental health services.
And it looks like HLA was approved, Measure HLA, which was called the Safe Streets Measure, although when you got bicycles in the same lanes as traffic, is that really safe? And what's your reaction to the passage of HLA?
Well, this is really troubling because according to the city administrative officer, it's going to cost $3 billion with a B dollars over approximately 10 years. $3 billion, and it's a completely unfunded mandate. The city is now required, if this does pass when all the votes are counted, and it looks like it will, the city is now required every time it repaves a street to put in one of these modifications from the mobility plan, such as a bus lane or a bike lane or curbs that jut out to slow the traffic or roundabouts or something, and there's no money for it. So the city's required to do it. The measure allows anyone, any resident of the city, to sue the city of Los Angeles if they don't do it, if they don't commit and to enacting this mobility plan every time they do a street repaving project. It's going to slow down street repairs tremendously because of all the engineering and the community outreach that would have to be done about each of these modifications. And if they do this, if they put these road diets in everywhere, it's very dangerous. The fire department came out against it. The firefighters union came out against it because it increases response time when you have road diets and fewer lanes and you've put up bollards and curbs and all sorts of things to block the traffic to slow it down. If you slow down the traffic, you slow down the fire trucks and ambulances. It's very dangerous. So I'm sorry to see that the voters fell for the advertising which said this is for healthy streets and pedestrian safety. It's certainly not for safety. And heaven forbid there's a fire, people need to evacuate quickly, and the roads are clogged and jammed because we've done road diets. This is just a really dangerous thing. Perhaps the city council can modify this mobility plan that is now a mandate. Perhaps they can modify it so that it isn't so dangerous. I'm not sure if they can or not, if they're committed to it. But that would be the next thing to look at because we don't have $3 billion in the city of Los Angeles budget to do this. And it's going to be really disastrous.
I know a lot of small businesses are upset about it as well because this would take away parking spaces in front of many businesses. So, Susan, I know you did your part in trying to inform the public on this as you do across the board. Thank you very much for coming to the line. We'll continue to watch what's happening with the numbers on Prop 1 and everything else. Susan Shelley, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard Friday nights here at 6 p.m. on your favorite station, 790 KBC. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and I'll be back tomorrow at 4 with Mottek on Money here on 790 KBC.
Afford Anything is a podcast that teaches you how to be smart with your money.
As a small business, you don't have the resources to pay the level of overhead and for the level of services that a Fortune 500 company could afford. So I certainly understand why, if you want to offer benefits, the providers of that fee is going to be higher because there's more account management per employee.
Make smarter choices and build a better life.
Afford Anything, wherever you listen.